Hello, good afternoon. My name is Professor Colin Bailey. I'm President and Principal here at Queen Mary, University of London. And it is my pleasure to be able to welcome you to today's Queen Mary Global Policy Institute Global Seminar, Mobility, the Social, Global and Policy Imperative. Now, of course, social mobility and inclusion is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And if I tell you a little bit about my history, those that know me, of course, know that I actually left school at 16. I turned my back on education. I was really totally fed up with school, only interested in two things. They were playing football and chasing girls. And I was quite good at playing football. I had a bit of a spell for QPR youth team. Chasing girls, I was absolutely rubbish at. But luckily, I managed to start an apprenticeship. And this was with a company called Lovell Construction. And they sent me to night school and day release to do an ONC. I did struggle again going back a little bit to education, even though it was a day release, but I managed to stick at it. And I managed to get an ONC and then a HNC with another company. And it was at that company going through a yearly pay review that someone actually turned to me and said, you know, we consider we pay you enough considering the type of background you come from. And that really made me think, well, what's all this about? I then actually left that company based on that comment and worked for another company. And I saw all these people coming through with degrees, graduates coming through and taking over me and actually progressing within the company and progressing within their careers. So I decided to have a look to see what this university business was all about. And I had no idea what university was for or about. No one in my family had ever mentioned university before. But I managed, through the widening participation scheme, managed to get a place at Sheffield University. And my goodness, did university open my horizons, open the doors to so many opportunities. Not only did I learn about my subject, but I learned about all other disciplines, thinking more about the arts, as people know I'm an engineer, but thinking about how these disciplines come together, but also meeting so many different people from all over the world. Now, of course, then I left university and I went back into industry, and I was lucky enough to come back and work within the academic sector, first as a professor of structural engineering, and then got dragged up the management line, if you like, and now I'm incredibly lucky and proud to run Queen Mary University of London. And why am I proud about Queen Mary? Because within its DNA is all about social mobility, about making sure that anyone, whatever their background, if they got the talent, they can come here and flourish. And when you look at Queen Mary, when you look at our build-up of our students, we've got over 90% are from state schools. 70% are classed as BME. Over 50%, 52% are first in their family to go to university. And over 30% are from families where the taxable income is less than £15,000 a year. Coupled with that profile of our student population, we have students and staff from over 162 nationalities on our campuses. And I say, where else can you meet so many different people from different backgrounds, different traditions and different cultures? And it's great to see that the Sunday Times University League Tables has voted us as the most inclusive university in the Russell Group, and actually runner-up as University of the Year. We were actually robbed for first place, in my opinion, but we were actually runner-up. But when you look at us as a university being the most inclusive university in the world, when you look at the diversity of our population, it isn't diversity for the sake of diversity. It's all about diversity of thought. It's bringing people from different backgrounds, as I say, different traditions, different cultures, all those thoughts coming together where they clash. And then you come up with new ideas, because we know if you have the same people from different backgrounds come together, I can actually tell you what they're thinking before they even start thinking it. So it's a matter of bringing together all those different people. And I'm so proud to be part of this great university. Not only have we got world-leading education, we got world-leading research. And that research is in partnership with everyone over the world. And I can give you a number of examples, but let me just pick a couple. Let me pick one related to COVID. So when we had the outbreak of COVID, we as a University Queen Mary were engaged with Barts Trust, setting up the Nightingale hospitals. And we were working with our colleagues in Wuhan. So forget about the politics. We as a university were working with academics and clinicians within Wuhan, seeing about the lessons learned and taking those lessons learned from Wuhan as we were setting up the medical care that we needed here within the UK. But I can go on. We're working in partnerships with people not just in China, but in America, Latin America, India, addressing what is important to us, not just the global challenges of sustainability, energy, and health, but inequalities that we see in society, not just in this country, but all over the world. And we're working with partnerships in university, in government, in industry, to address those inequalities, but also to help shape a society and create a world in which we all want to live in. So enough from me. You haven't come here to listen to me and about Queen Mary. You've come here to listen to our excellent panel. So I would like, first of all, to introduce our chair for this discussion, Lord Patel of Bradford, who will further set out the scene and introduce our fantastic panel. Lord Patel is a qualified social worker, a leading authority on mental health, as well as a passionate fan of cricket. And he will tell you all about cricket, among his other distinctions, of course. And we are fortunate to count Lord Patel as a member of the Queen Mary Policy Institute Advisory Board. He is without doubt one of the Institute's most active supporters and champions. And we are delighted that he has agreed to steer tonight's conversation. So enough from me, and over to you, Lord Patel. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Bailey. You've articulated extremely well some of the reasons that I joined the Global Policy Institute's Advisory Board. Much of what you've said resonates with me, and the reasons why I was so keen to be part of this institution. In particular, I think your use of high quality research to make a difference to people's lives, to have an impact on policy, on practice, and on legislation, not only here in the UK, but abroad. And obviously the very clear commitment to increasing the life chances of the students at Queen Mary's. You're a unique Russell Group university in the diversity and breadth of the students it has. So for me, it's a pleasure and honour to be associated with you, and a privilege to be chairing such an important webinar today with, as you said, a panel of real experts from a variety of different fields. A few short words. I think for many people, social mobility refers to the ability for children to have a better life than their parents. But an individual's life chances are often predetermined by the level of education they'll attain, the type of work they'll do, and the level of income they'll earn. I'm lucky enough to have been part of a generation that was able to benefit from social mobility. I came to the UK as a migrant with my family in the 1960s. And even though I arrived in the UK as a baby, I didn't go to school until I was 7. And then I was packed off to an immigrant centre for the first year. So I didn't learn to read and write till I was about 8 or 9. And like so many other kids growing up poor in Bradford, I never really understood, a bit like you, Colin, the value of education. Cricket was more important. I did learn to read and write well with the help of teachers and mentors. But after leaving school with a few A levels, I couldn't think about university. It wasn't possible. I needed to work. I went through a series of different jobs, whatever was available, from sweeping floors to a civil service waiter, to a barman, selling life insurance, selling cars, working in a betting office, working retail, in accountancy. I worked in the ambulance service, in the police service, until I eventually became a social worker. And now, of course, I'm privileged to be a parliamentarian in the House of Lords. As I said, I was very lucky. And one of my greatest concerns is that today, for too many people, the chance to do better than your parents, to reach for and grasp opportunity, appear to be on the decline. There are increasing areas in the UK that are left behind, where mobility has stopped or is even in reverse, and we are at risk of losing whole generations to long-term unemployment and lost life chances, with all the health and social harms that follow. There's a lot of talk right now in the UK about levelling up and how we reverse these trends in some of the most deprived cities, towns and areas. But we have to see the details of what this means and the practical things that government, employers, education providers and communities need to do to make this a reality. If people lack the ability and resources to improve their lives, and access to high quality education and training is one of the key means to do this, then not only are we missing vital talents, but economic growth will stall, innovation cease, and inequalities and social cohesion become worse. In the past, it was often assumed that creating success from some at the top would trickle down to those at the bottom. There's nothing inevitable about social mobility being passed from one generation to another. And the difference in mobility outcomes across countries suggests there's so much more to be done to create mobility and increase life chances across the board. And that means investing in education and training. For instance, we know countries which spend more on education tend to have higher social mobility. And those spending higher on health and prevention creates better health. However, it's not only the public resources devoted to education and health, but I would argue it's their quality, their effective use, and targeting to disadvantaged groups that's important. Therefore, the policy response, in my view, is not confined to spending more overall, but rather to target spending on effective programs and ensuring their quality and equal access for all. For example, UUKI research indicates that students who participate in a mobility abroad during their degree are more successful academically, find jobs faster, and have higher starting salaries. The effect is even more pronounced for lower socioeconomic groups and those from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. However, as we know, students from these backgrounds are generally underrepresented in student mobility programs. And we've all been through a lot this last year of the terrible pandemic. And some countries are still very much in the grip of this. And while we can start to be hopeful about the outcomes of vaccines, we cannot underestimate the impact of the last year's social restrictions on education and on our young people in particular. We know a lot more about inequalities, and there is, I perceive, a stronger interest in addressing these in the light of the pandemic. But we have to ensure that this is translated into real actions that support and strengthen mobility for our students and beyond their time with us as education providers as they progress into employment. So I'm really pleased to be here today and to hear from our expert panel about these issues and how they're being addressed and what more we can do to ensure sustainable and robust change that supports and strengthens mobility. As you said, we've got real experts on the subject. So without further ado, let's listen to them. I'm going to introduce each speaker, let them have an opportunity to say some words, maybe take some urgent questions, and then at the end have an opportunity for a whole list of questions. First, we have Sarah Atkinson, the Chief Executive Officer of the Social Mobility Foundation. It's a real pleasure to have you here today, Sarah.
Thank you, Kamlesh. Thank you, Colin. Both of you have done such a fantastic job in both explaining what we're talking about when we talk about social mobility and being real passionate advocates for it. I wanted to reflect a little bit from our work. The Social Mobility Foundation is a charity. We aim to make a practical difference for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to help them achieve their potential. So we are all about what works. In our student programs, working with young people to help them get into universities, like Queen Mary, which is a top choice for SMF students, to help them get into their careers, to help them be successful and build a network. In our work with employers, to help them to understand what to do to minimise social class disadvantage and open up pathways. And in our broader advocacy for social mobility for everybody who can take action to do so. We are all about the practical, we're all about making a difference. And I'm going to share some thoughts and some remarks from where we sit and what we've seen, particularly over the last year, but in our work in this field for 15 years. So we've talked about social mobility being about a change, about the propensity, the possibility for individuals to change their social class, their socioeconomic status. It's already much more complicated than poverty and income. Of course, it's often about money. It's very often about money or not having money and the means through money to do things like have stable housing, like have access to opportunities. But it's also in our students, we see quite a complex relationship between income and money, education, place and community, the environment you're growing up in, the peers and the role models that you see around you. And then we throw in additional factors that our young people talk to us about, their accents, their cultural capital, the broader opportunities they've had to engage in culture and to feel confident when talking to other people who've had those opportunities. The confidence, which can present in our young people as a huge lack of confidence, a silence and unwillingness to voice the opinions we know they have, and can also present as an excessive overconfidence. Some of our young people can come across as cocky and brash because they don't know how to negotiate environments in which people share their opinions and knock them about. So it's an enormously complex piece, and it relates ultimately to being able to change your living standards and the way that you live when we talk about social mobility. Social class disadvantages is what Professor Paul Ingram called in the Harvard Business Review earlier this year, the forgotten dimension of diversity. So social class disadvantage prevails in every economy in the developed world, and it has significant effects. And in this country, we're no different. Employees in elite occupations from working class backgrounds earn £6,000 a year less than their peers from more privileged backgrounds. Only 5% of free school meal students go to Russell Group universities. It sounds like Colin's hogging the majority of them. And place really matters as well, even where you are disadvantaged. If you're disadvantaged and you're in Kensington and Chelsea, half of you will go to university. In Barnsley, in Hastings, in Eastbourne, that's 10%. So things don't happen for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds in our country. And of course, the risks of this are evident. You know, for individual organisations, universities and businesses, you're missing out on talent because you're looking in the wrong places. People who might benefit the most and thrive the most and contribute the most might be least likely to find a path. I think there's also a broader worry and risk for our economy and our society if whole cohorts and whole communities feel left behind. Let's be honest, if they are left behind, then the message of their own participation in our society and in our economy is damaging and dangerous. Yet the bad news is in the pandemic, this has got significantly worse, as Kamlesh has talked about. Nearly 2 million students had no access to laptops for education while schools were closed this year. Almost all of the students on our programme told us that their access to extracurricular activities, those broader enrichment activities that are so important to build that confidence and those networks, didn't happen to them during the pandemic. There was nothing available for the underprivileged. The Education Endowment Foundation says the lost learning is going to take us 10 years to catch up on, and that cohort is going to be affected over their lifetime with an extra 3% of earnings reduction. So it's costing us money and it's costing us talent. A couple of things I wanted to share for kind of provocation about why this persists, because we know it's there and we know it's not right. We know it's doing us damage. I think the first thing is an awkwardness around the language of class and socioeconomic class disadvantage. Talking about class is almost more taboo than talking about sex or religion in our society these days. Admitting that class is an issue and that it's a disadvantage can be problematic. And so if we can't talk about it and we can't find the language to describe it or to measure it or to tackle it, then we aren't engaging with it fully. I think there's a belief still that persists that social mobility and socioeconomic class disadvantage is fixable at an early age with an intervention. If you can get a young person into university or get them onto a graduate career path, that you've fixed it, when actually we know that social class disadvantage persists throughout your life, and regardless of whether we've been able to access some of the earlier opportunities. I think there's a dangerous mythology around meritocracy that means that we think that things like contextual admissions or contextual recruitment means dropping standards, means reducing the talent that you're and the expectation that you're asking for. When in fact, we know that if as a young person you have overcome the barriers and shown the resilience that you have to be able to beat the odds, how much more will you be able to achieve when you get the level playing field? And like every other kind of disadvantage, I think there's an unwillingness of those of us with privilege to admit it may have benefited us and we may need to give a little bit of our advantages up to level the playing field. But the silver lining, to end on a more cheerful note of all this gloom, is that the pandemic, the light the pandemic has shone on social class disadvantage is inevitable and inexorable. We all know much more than we ever did how much our socioeconomic background is affecting the things that we can do and the resilience and opportunities that we have. The public have clocked onto this and they are determined to see this change. Every survey done by the Social Mobility Commission, by PwC, by the Sutton Trust, in what the public expects when it comes to social class disadvantage is that they've cottoned on that it isn't fair, and they expect universities, businesses and the government to do something about it when in building back to build back better. And so that's the silver lining of the impact the pandemic has had on our young people, which has been resolutely negative and driving things in the wrong direction, is that maybe we've blown open the forgotten dimension of disadvantage and we'll have to address it as we build back the economy. Thank you, Kamlesh.
I'm not sure how I sum that up, but that was a very passionate and a very stark, sort of frightening speech almost, because you know, the wonderful things you talk about the practical difference that your organisation makes, and I think that resonates with all of us. You know, the idea of place and community and the soft skills and the culture, and then the sort of hard facts and figures that really bring home lots and lots of issues. I should ask people to keep throwing in your questions in the chat function. They will be picked up and we'll try and address as many as possible. I'd just like to kick off because I mentioned something in my few words about this idea of the levelling up agenda. And I just wanted to ask you really, you know, how does the levelling up agenda relate to social mobility in your mind? Are they the same thing or different?
I'm not sure they're the same thing at the moment. I'm not sure the levelling up agenda was conceived as a social mobility agenda, but I think it absolutely can be. And for the avoidance of doubt, I really think it should be. I think the risk with levelling up is that we talk only about infrastructure. We talk about physical things, which will indeed make a difference. Some of our young people are living in communities where there's no train station, there's no infrastructure whatsoever. That absolutely affects your ability to access opportunities and your connection. But levelling up has also got to be an agenda that's about people, about skills, and about a lasting legacy that isn't just in physical infrastructure, but is in social infrastructure. I think the exciting thing is that I'm not sure when levelling up was first suggested, anyone was really clear what it definitely meant. And so there's a lot of room to shape that. And certainly the appointment of the new levelling up advisor in the Prime Minister's office is someone who really understands social infrastructure as well as physical infrastructure. So I think there's a chink of light there that means that levelling up could be a really powerful social mobility agenda, but it's not there yet.
Some light at the end of the tunnel. Before I move on to our next speaker, there's a question from the audience, Danishita, and very important question. Do students who are the first in the family to attend university sometimes struggle once they gain admission to a top institution? And how can they be supported?
Yeah, they absolutely do. And we see this in the young people that we support. Our programme supports young people not just into university, but right the way through university and for a year afterwards. And we do that because we know that our students continue to need that support. There's sometimes a risk for our young people that when you've been the one clever one in a school where maybe no one's been to a Russell Group university, maybe nobody much goes to university, you don't realise how, and you're the top of the class, and it's sort of sometimes it's effortless academically, and even if not socioeconomically, and you get to university and everyone's as good as you, and quite a lot of them are better than you. That can be quite striking for our students. That can be quite invigorating and exciting and stimulating, but it also can be quite an adjustment to make, which can take some time. So there's support around those kind of the readjusting of your place that can need some support. There's also a lot of practical support that our students need, because affordability of university, our students absolutely will have to work while studying, balancing the broader enrichment opportunities that they want and need to take advantage of, making sure that they've got an eye on their own career development, the kind of juggling that you have to do at university. Our students need support to help them manage and engage with all of that. And of course, as I say, we just know that getting into a good university hasn't solved every problem. It's still our students are still going to have to work twice as hard, fight twice as hard, compete twice as hard. And so that constant requiring you to fight harder and work harder puts a burden on which is a lot to bear on young people. So they do need support, they do need recognition. It's not just access, it's success. And that kind of support is critical. I know Queen Mary have got their eyes on that. I don't think universities can be too kind of conscious or too supportive of students who've come in as the first generation.
Like, as you were talking, I can see Colin Bailey's cogs ticking away in his head, and I'm sure there's some practical suggestions coming up soon. I'm just going to move to our next speaker, Priti Srivastava. Now, she's a senior vice president of corporate affairs at a huge conglomerate, Reliance Industries. So if anybody knows anything about India, then this is the biggest conglomerate that exists. And, Priti's had a tough time recently. India's in a terrible state. She's, suffered herself with her family and all the issues. So for her to be on this call all the way from India today, we're humbled, and we're really pleased that you've made that effort, Priti. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Patel. First, I would like to thank the university for inviting me. And personally, it is very important for me because I'm just had a loss coming out of COVID pneumonia. And also what I do gives me a message that, if I could share my thoughts, if I could reach out globally for help, and panels like this, discussion, when we can share, I think we can collectively really make a difference. To give a very brief background, I've been a literature student, so I think from heart and creative in whatever I do. But my profession for last 35 years has been public affairs, and governance and strategy is my core. For last 25 years, I've been extremely lucky to work for a very important man in India and globally, Mr. Mukesh Ambani. And with the vision of Reliance, we have been able to shape a lot of future and a lot of industries, not only for India and globally. So we are we have a refinery, we are running the largest telecom network in India called Jio. We are into retail, we are into sports, we are into health, we are into biotechnology, and soon getting into a lot of other communication area. Today, I've come here wearing two hats. One is definitely representing my company and giving you a little overview as a corporate, how we've been able to contribute to the pandemic. But more importantly, as an individual who has been working on the ground at the grassroots level for last 15 years, and especially from the lockdown, trying to see how changes have come. And I just want to start with 5 teachings, which not only I have learned, but this is a summary of the people I've spoken, of my company, and what we need to do. Because what has happened is not in control of anybody. And right now, it is important to speak about it because India is really passing through some dark times. So the first teaching is that we all learn to adapt to change. Pandemic hit us very, very surprisingly. None of us were prepared. We didn't know. And slowly over the years, we have learned. But still, the second wave was even deadly. So whatever the teachings last year did not help, we had to de-learn and start learning again. So one lesson in all sectors, whether it's education, whether it's sustainability, whether it's economic governance for the country, is that we need to be very agile and open to change. And it is more to do with what we are facing, and both as a nation and also globally. Second is we all have learned to improvise. Talking of the social work we do, sustainability, uh, I was very touched when Sarah mentioned about the children, because I work with street children, out of school children. And when there were campaigns or, globally, that, please wear mask, have social distances, and wash your hands. These are the people in the communities where there was a very small space for 8 to 10 people staying in the same room. So what do you do? How do you tell them? They have no money. They don't understand mass. There is water crisis in the slums. Social distance is practically not possible. So we had to improvise, go to them. All we could tell them is talk about hygiene. So sometimes even our social campaigns, health campaigns, which are for masses, are so generalized, we forget that we have to give a very different treatment to the communities depending on their local habits and the way they live. Third is my favorite, optimizing technology. Being heading regulatory operations for a very successful network called Jio in India, we realized that technology really came to our rescue as a friend and really helped us to reach out, not only to reach to our loved ones when we were in home isolation, or reach out to the health authorities or get information, but also in our community work. What we were able to do is, because most of the people in the community, due to financial reasons, cannot even afford a phone, or if they have a phone, it is only for voice. They can't afford a data pack, so no information is going to them. And then language is an issue, as you know, in India there's so many languages, and just English and the local language needs change. So we came with an idea that the Gram Pradhan, who was the head of the panchayat or the community, we spoke to him and gave him a telephone or a second-hand laptop or whatever PC we could manage in the limited budget, and we used to pass him the information, and through him verbally we used to talk to the communities. So what I realized is that technology is important, but a lot of people in the communities are not able to use this technology. But the work doesn't stop. We have to be innovative and find how can we use technology. And most important is, globally we all need to be integrated and be resilient. Uh, uh, it is a known fact, whether it's vaccination or whether it's a cure, it is each country has learned from a global experience, and it has come together. And I felt that the biggest lesson is we cannot think like an individual nation. It has to be global and integrated, and we have to learn. And even most of the problems on education and health is common. One of the projects which I'm very proud of I'm doing is working for the elderly people in the home care or in their houses who are left alone, and their children are not staying with them. And I've been speaking to my friends globally. It is absolutely the same challenges we felt. So there are a lot of issues socially on sustainability which are common. So it is very important that we have this continuous dialogue globally and we keep working. And normally it happens is when I work on governance that it has to be government. This pandemic has clearly shown we cannot just leave everything to the government. And especially in a country like India, which is huge, and each state is like a country in other part of the globe. So it's like 32 countries we are managing. So, and it has to broken down to the district level. I feel not only in India and other countries. So the local district people need to decide local rules and how they need to treat and vaccination. And it's a huge governance issue in India. India's never worked like this. It had a centralized government and the rules were centralized but implemented by the states. But the pandemic has says that we need to change and we need to continuously learn. And the stakeholders are now individuals. On top of my list is individual. The individual efforts, I think, in all countries we have held more people than the government, the civil society. My heart goes out to all the health workers in all the countries. In India, we call there's a whole chain of Asha workers, of women who go down to the villages and work in the community. So all the non-profit and the civil organizations really they never sat at rest and they came to the rescue. So they have a very important role. And we have a think tank, Lord Patel knows, called Niti Aayog, which is the think tank for sustainability and policy. And while speaking to them, I realized that, we all have our goal of 2030 of SDGs. And my individual recommendation is we all need to relook at it. And we need to, penetrate and have more debate. And as Sarah said, in a lot of areas, we have gone back, I don't know how many years. So we really need to change our SDG goals, and we really need to be more practical and more real time. Corporates, I'll give example of my own company. The first thing what we did, we start building health infrastructure. We just had one hospital running under our foundation, but we realized that the immediate needs is infrastructure. So we partnered with smaller hospitals, with hotels, with isolation. So that's the first thing as a corporate we did. We started manufacturing PPE kits. We started distributing masks. We started educating through our social projects which are going on, whether in school or with farmers. But the biggest thing I think as a corporate we could contribute is providing oxygen from our refinery. So today Reliance Industries cater to 11% of India's needs for oxygen, and we are transporting it through rail and other logistics to different state. And we see other corporates also coming together. But what is needed in India and maybe globally, that we all working individually, but what is needed is how can we all work collectively? That's a huge challenge. I don't have an answer. Each organization has their own vision, own way of working. But I think the key to fight this pandemic is within the country and globally, if the corporates can come together, pool in resources, pool in their vision and objective, I think they will help. And there's something which I'm working on, and I will not elaborate because work in progress, is mental mobility. And Lord Patel is somebody who's worked on mental health, and he'll understand. And I feel after pandemic, that's going to be the biggest challenge for all of us, is mental wellness. So I'm working on a business plan. I'll be reaching out to all corporates, individuals, civil society, and globally, how can we pool in and how can we work together? And most importantly, how can we learn from each other? Because it has to be constant learning. None of us will have answers. So it has to be very collective. I think these were my opening remarks, and I would love to answer any questions. Thank you.
Again, it's where do you start? I mean, so many important messages, and I think so many synergies with what's been happening in the UK, but a huge and macro level in India. The need to improvise, the need to change, but your description of the huge inequalities. I mean, we talked about inequalities, Sarah and myself, but, when we're talking about street children and people living in slums, the inequalities are just mind-boggling. I think technology has been a big issue. If we look at the NHS in the United Kingdom, we've advanced 10 years in 6 months. So we've been forced to do that. And technology plays a phenomenal part. And as you said, this is a global effort. Partnership, collaboration, public-private partnerships. Without that, we're going nowhere. And people, in the UK, we've had bad things and good things happen. One of the good things was 10 million volunteers that suddenly, helped. Your ASHA workers in India have kept India going. And I think it's so important. And I suppose the big focus for another day, the Sustainable Development Goals and how we achieve them are incredible. I know the amount of work you do. I'm absolutely passionate about mental health because we know what's happening already in this country and what's going to happen as the months go by and what's happening with you. But, you've got a massive corporate role. For 35 years, you're, working at this huge corporate level. But in addition, you have been doing all this volunteering work. How do you personally strike that balance?
Very good question, Lord Patel. This is it's a very conscious effort, to be very true. Because when you work for a corporate as big as Reliance, all you see is, volumes, definitely, but working, it's like, flying an aeroplane. You see an aerial view and you make changes. But what you learn is how to make business plans on sustainability. You understand government. You can, be a partner with the government in, making policy changes. But what was missing is that I didn't know what is ground reality. Sometimes you make rules, but they are of no value to a common man, to our communities. So it was a very conscious effort. While I learned the governance, the rules, the business case, working with the government, with the corporate, I just wanted to work with the common man in the communities and understand their issues. And I realized there's a huge gap. I mean, pardon if anybody else is from corporate, as we raise our flag on CSR, we say, but most of the time, the help really doesn't go to the needy. It's get lost in between. So I wanted to carve a niche for myself where I become the feedback to the government, a feedback to my corporate and other corporates, and also a connecting link between the communities, between the government and the corporates, because real-time data is not there. We talk of huge numbers in India on vaccination, huge numbers of people losing and all, but we don't have a mechanism to get a real-time data. And that is something we need to use technology, we need to use other parameters, because unless we don't have the right data, and we are struggling in India on the real-time data, we won't be able to get the policies to the communities, and we won't be able to plan, because sometimes planning is done on a laptop, on formulas. But if we feed in wrong data, our results will be wrong. So I, somewhere in my own individual capacity, trying to get these problems to the corporates and the government, and also maybe suggest some and also people see, and I'm not the only one, there's so many people, individuals like me, corporate professionals are working, and that gives a lot of comfort and support to the people in communities, that we are not just white collared people, we are just one of them, and we are coming and working, and to create that kind of emotional and moral support is very important, because people, as you said earlier, and Professor Bailey also said, are losing jobs. And India it's in a mess, because a huge population are not very unstructured industries, daily wages, unskilled labor, and none of us have solution to that. So at least what we can do, the civil society, individual like us, can go and hold hand in whatever capacity. So that was a dream, and I need to pursue it with help of everybody else. Thank you.
I think many of us who are in leadership positions need to take a similar view in life, and I'm sure Colin and others will agree with me. There's lots of questions coming through, and please keep submitting them on the Q&A function. But before I take some more questions from the audience, I want to move on to our last two speakers. So let's thank you, Preeti. Let's go to Maddalaine. Madalaine's Director of Education at the British Council. We're so pleased to have you here today, Maddalaine. Over to you.
Thank you. It was really good to hear from Preeti. And I just want to say first that my thoughts and prayers are with the people of India. The British Council, of course, has offices in Chennai, Kolkata, Mumbai, New Delhi, and our shared support centre, which employs a lot of people, is in Noida. So I am hearing quite regularly of the challenges that people are facing, and just want to express my sympathy.
Thank you.
As you might expect from the British Council, I'm going to talk about mobility in the context of cultural relations, and in particular education mobility, because that's my area. So the government's integrated review of security, defence, development and foreign policy characterises the new international relations environment as increasingly competitive and multipolar, with newly emerging geopolitical and economic blocks of influence and values, including a retreat to nationalism and our country first rhetoric and policies in many important places around the world. And this is deeply troubling. If we have learned anything from the ongoing pandemic, it is that only global solutions have any chance of working. And equally, climate change can only be tackled if everyone agrees to take responsibility and to take action. The UK wants to promote multilateralism, support open societies and defend human rights, and it can't do this by force. It must use influence and attraction, its soft power. And this is rooted in who we are as a country, our values and way of life. And the British Council seeks to do this through cultural relations, by sharing our culture and values and learning about other peoples, and doing this through overseas experiences, whether people come here or UK people go overseas, is very effective. This is because education often takes place during a formative period in a person's life, and because education is fundamentally a co-created experience. The student must want to learn and be open to learning. And this makes them open to learning about other cultures and open to being changed by what they learn. And because it operates in the people to people rather than the government to government space, it's also a way of maintaining engagement with regimes with whom governmental relations are strained. And the British Council has continued to promote educational exchanges in Russia and China through periods when diplomatic relations have broken off or been reduced. So it's really important for the UK, despite the pandemic and the economic consequences, and despite Brexit, that we continue to promote educational mobility. And it's, of course, as Kamlesh said right at the beginning, also really good for the students who participate in periods of study or work overseas. They get better academic results, they gain skills that employers value, including resilience, the ability to solve problems, and a global outlook. And a positive study abroad experience is also life enriching. It can build lifelong connections and can lead to important social, cultural, educational, and trading relationships. And it's also good for the UK to have a cadre of people with language skills, a deep understanding of other cultures, and an international outlook, whether for trade or for diplomacy. And it's worth noting, again, as Kamlesh noted right at the beginning, that although young people from less advantaged backgrounds are underrepresented as participants on mobility programmes such as Erasmus+, they tend to experience even greater benefits when they do go. Speaking of Erasmus+, until December 2020, the UK was part of the EU's Erasmus+ programme, and about half of student mobility took place through this programme. Students could study, volunteer, or work overseas, usually for periods from 3 months to a year. The placements were largely in the EU, although there were some opportunities to go to partner countries and more limited opportunities to go to other countries anywhere in the world. Although there were some efforts to ensure the programme was open to people from a range of social backgrounds, the EU was aware and troubled that it predominantly appealed to people from higher social backgrounds, and particularly those studying at Russell Group universities. And this is perhaps partly because they are increasingly the only universities that offer modern foreign languages. The other 50% of mobility took place through university organised programmes and included some features which made them more attractive to people from less advantaged backgrounds, such as shorter stays, the opportunity to go to English-speaking countries, and the opportunity to go as a cohort. For example, the University of Salford took a whole class of fashion students to China for a week, where they put on a fashion show with their peers at a Chinese university. And De Montfort University took a cohort of students to the United States. And this helps overcome barriers such as finance, as shorter stays are less expensive. It's easier for students to manage caring responsibilities, and going as a cohort helps address a lack of confidence that some students can feel in going alone to a country where you don't speak the language or understand the culture. There are, of course, trade-offs. It's unlikely that students on shorter mobility placements will develop the same mastery of a language, understanding of a culture, and depth of relationships, although we don't yet have a strong evidence base in this area. The UK is, of course, no longer part of Erasmus+ and has put in place an alternative scheme known as Turing. This is explicitly positioned as part of the Levelling Up agenda and aims to encourage applications from institutions with more disadvantaged students, e.g. by providing support for travel costs, and allows shorter places from 4 weeks in higher education. It enables UK students from schools, further education and vocational and technical education training providers and higher education institutions the opportunity to go on education mobilities around the world. And we're leading on international engagement for Turing, promoting and sharing information about the scheme with government and educational organisations through our country teams and their networks. The scheme has received a lot of interest overseas, especially outside Europe, where there has long been a desire for more two-way mobility, i.e. to host more UK students. And some countries would also like to explore formal reciprocal arrangements with touring and local mobility schemes once the long-term funding for touring is more certain. £110 million has been allocated for the first year, and the scheme will facilitate approximately 35,000 UK outward mobilities. At this point, funding is only secured for 1 year, and the scheme is more limited than Erasmus+, but we understand that DFE will seek to gain multi-year funding as part of the next CSR. And this should also provide an opportunity for the scheme to evolve in light of learning from the pilot year. And I hope it does, because to take Martin Luther King out of context, such work should be long because it takes time, broad because it reaches out, deep because it is about what matters in life, and tall because it aims for higher goals. Thank you.
What a lovely quote to end that on. And you know, it's really good to hear about touring, because you know, lots of us have been concerned about what comes next, and you know, the British Council do some fantastic work, and hopefully, you know, more money is secured for this to continue. There's been a really interesting question from Ben Moore, and I have a question. I'm sort of going to blend both of them. It's about the idea of blended learning. You were talking about, obviously, the enormous value young people get to going overseas, and how much they can learn and develop. But we're now balancing that with not only COVID and the pandemic, but all the concerns about climate change. Do you see the future as blended learning, or you know, virtual international experiences? Is that the same? Will it be the same?
Yes. So when I'm thinking about sort of mobility experiences as part of a course, rather than students who are choosing to go to another country to talk about, to study their whole course, I would say that a virtual experience is better than no international experience at all, and that it can often be a really good first step to build confidence for people who might find jumping to spending several months abroad too daunting, but it's not as good as physical mobility. I would say this view is supported by the European Commission, which allowed some virtual mobility under the Erasmus scheme in response to COVID, and also by the European University Association, which states that physical mobility is the goal, but if not feasible, blended or entirely virtual mobility will be eligible. And this makes sense, because when we look at why employers value graduates who have undertaken study or work abroad, it's for qualities like resilience and the ability to solve problems and a deep understanding of other cultures, which are more likely to be developed through physically going to another country. Having said that, a number of universities are trialling virtual mobility during the pandemic, and it will be really interesting to see the evaluation and learning from this. I'll just say quickly, so I know I'm taking a long time to answer this question, but when you think about students going overseas for their whole period of study, I would say there is a trend towards students doing maybe the first year in their home country and then coming overseas to manage the costs. And a piece of research that the British Council did with UUKI last year suggested it's as many as 1 in 6 international students that come to the UK. And I think we might see even more of that as people respond to the pandemic and the economic kind of consequences of that.
Yeah, fascinating. And it sort of links back to what Priti said earlier about improvising and our ability to adapt to change. So, you know, wait and watch. I think, you know, thank you very much. It's fascinating. Before I go on to our last speaker, I'm going to throw a curveball to Colin. He's not expecting this, obviously, but it's just a really interesting question that's being posed from Keith. And it says, the pandemic has interrupted a lot of young people's schooling. What does this mean for universities, And is it also an opportunity to reimagine the first year of higher education, Colin?
Yes, absolutely. I think when we listen to comments from panel members and the experience we've got, there's inequalities in society, there's inequalities in the education. The students that come to us are at different levels and at different levels of development. And we've put in place a lot of support for students, especially students who are first in their family to go to university. And it's not just when they arrive, it's their journey as they go through their education into universities. We spend a lot of time, and the staff here at Queen Mary spend a lot of time with localised schools, but schools all over the country, informing them about the opportunities from a university education, not Queen Mary, but from a university education. And if they come to Queen Mary, then that's great, and that's great for us. But we put in a lot of support to make sure that all students, all from different backgrounds, can get that level and that confidence. And everyone's talked about confidence. It's really important because people do come, especially from families that have got no experience of what university was like. It's like I was, you know, what to expect. And that lack of confidence is something that we try to address with all our students and make sure that they get that confidence as they go through their course, but then into employment and into the sectors that they're looking for. And our students educationally are absolutely fantastic, but it's that sort of confidence and that social skills, if you like, that is slightly missing, that we are trying to put in place to make sure that they succeed in any sectors that they want to go into.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for, and sorry I threw a curveball at you there. And now we move on to our final panelist. We're really, really pleased to have Isabel here today. She's the Deputy Director, European Programmes at the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Big role for you, Isabel.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's such an important topic, and it's been really great listening to all the other contributions. So I work in the International Research and Innovation Directorate, and my team have responsibility for policy for research and mobility and migration. So I'm coming at this mobility question from yet a slightly different angle. So facilitating mobility, whether that is global mobility or mobility across professional fields, is absolutely central to supporting R&D in the UK. And the government published last year an R&D roadmap that set out our commitment to ensuring that the UK is a leading global destination for scientists and researchers to live and work. And to that end, we're really looking at how we can support greater mobility of the research and innovation workforce between business and academia, between different sectors, but also between the UK and other countries. And I will focus today mainly on that international mobility of researchers aspect, but I'll touch on some of the other things I've just mentioned. So as we've all been talking already, research and innovation are inherently global, and the pandemic has brought that home to us very much. International collaboration and mobility of talent are also associated with more impactful research, in large part because it brings together people from different places, people with different ideas. So facilitating that mobility is in our interest. And clearly the UK is already a top destination for globally mobile talent and a top collaborator internationally when it comes to research. And we're also pleased that we've associated Horizon Europe in the context of that. But we will remain ambitious to strengthen and grow our R&D collaborations worldwide and increase the attractiveness that we have to other people. And that really requires a system that supports mobility both into but also out of the UK to really build those relationships and foster new ideas. So what are we talking about? What are we doing then? So there are several understood barriers and drivers to international mobility, including professional opportunities. So that might be jobs, access to funding for researchers, opportunities to work on particular projects. Then there are practical and formal things. So getting a visa, being able to travel here, being able to relocate. And then there are the sort of personal considerations that people might have, like family, is there a language barrier? And we also know that researchers with the highest ambition are likely to be globally mobile throughout their careers, so they can pick and choose where they go. So we want to understand our options to improve the competitiveness of the UK offer, to create opportunities to bring talent in from around the world and bring everyone together to tackle shared global challenges like climate change, for example. And we also want to ensure that global mobility is not only open for individuals from certain backgrounds, but that our offer is really inclusive and fully inclusive of people with different backgrounds, different characteristics everywhere. The government has taken a few steps already. So the Office for Talent has been set up and is looking to support talent and facilitate mobility, both for people just building their careers and those who are already world leaders in their fields. And it has begun work to review the effectiveness of the current rules and experiences of people coming here. And it's exploring how to better help those people to understand the opportunities on offer and help break down any barriers that they might face. So clearly I've alluded to it at the beginning, but visa routes and systems are obviously a key part to this and enabling that mobility. And at the beginning of the year, as you will know, the government launched a new points-based system to create a single global immigration system. But as the international demand for talent grows, we're planning to build on this new system with a set of targeted and tailored reforms alongside a proactive global outreach strategy to ensure that we can attract and retain the really high-skilled, globally mobile talent, particularly in academia, science, research and technology, and so on. And the plan for growth, which was launched in the spring, announced some planned changes already, including the introduction of an elite points-based visa, a review of the innovator route, and reforms to the global talent visa that would allow holders of international prizes to be automatically eligible. But we also want the UK to continue to be a welcoming and world-class destination for all students, so including international and European PhD candidates, for example. And that's what the new graduates are there for, and they will allow international students who study here from this summer to stay in the UK for 3 years after a PhD or 2 after an undergraduate or master's degree. I've talked a lot about inward mobility, but we're also working to strengthen and grow our R&D collaborations with overseas governments and international funders globally through strategic bilateral cooperation and also participation in multilateral organisations and networks. And that includes specific mobility schemes as well, including via the British Council, for example, and others. So there is a lot going on international mobility, but it is critical that we get that absolutely right because it's so important for everyone. And before I wrap up, just one point on wider mobility. We're also currently developing what we call an R&D people and culture strategy, which will set out the sort of actions that government, but also funders, employers and individuals can take to ensure that the R&D sector has the people it needs at all levels, but that they're also working in a culture that gets the best out of everyone. And it's based around sort of 3 core themes that are people, culture and talent. But as part of it, we're looking to increase the attractiveness, as I've just talked about, but also to increase professional mobility and porosity across the system, especially between academia and industry, and looking to diversify career paths rather than having like very narrow academic research career paths. So that's just another angle to it. But I have probably talked for a little bit too long, so I will stop here, but very happy to take any questions.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. Lots of questions coming in. One was about, what does UK association to Horizon Europe mean for international research and mobility?
It's a really great opportunity, really. So our decision to participate as part of the agreement with the EU at the end of last year provides a platform through which our scientists and innovators can really tackle the big global challenges like climate change, global health. And it brings massive advantages to UK researchers as well. And we absolutely encourage everyone to apply for funding. And in terms of mobility, the kind of networks and connections that you get out of Horizon Europe are massive opportunities to foster mobility of researchers across Europe, but also more widely. So, for example, inward and outward mobility is encouraged through the Marie Curie Action, so MSCA, and they encourage individuals to work in other countries and aim to make the whole world a kind of learning environment and really encourage collaboration across countries, but also across sectors and different disciplines. So, and our participation in Horizon Europe enables our researchers to be part of that and get those opportunities to really be mobile and participate. So it's a great opportunity, and also anyone who is any researcher or anyone who's named on any Horizon programs and any awards of that, they're automatically eligible for the Global Talent Visa as well. So it makes that easier as well.
So lots of light at the end of the tunnel, I think there. I mean, we could, you know, we've barely touched some of the questions that are flooding in. I mean, we could go on for another hour or two. There's a couple I'd love just to pose. There's a question from Swati, and it says, in today's world, information is hypermobile, but not all of it's reliable. Some of it, particularly where it relates to public health, can be actually dangerous. How do we tackle misinformation for the public good? Priti, I think with your experience in India, I think that might be a really interesting one.
I completely agree. You know, getting on mobile information technology and especially social media is a two-way sword, where the whole intent is to reach out to people, disseminate the right information, but then you don't have the control. And even we have regulation in place in India, and we all know that Facebook, WhatsApp are working on privacy regulation. They are closing down accounts. But I think it more than talking from a mobile operator or somebody who's making laws on information technology, it is more of individual responsibilities, more of a social change we need to make, and try to motivate people, because right now globally and especially in India, people have stopped looking at WhatsApp because there's so much of misinformation, and especially on health. Like we all know we had this crisis of lack of oxygen 2 weeks back. 2-3 weeks were really bad, and we reached out globally for giving us oxygen concentrators. But then there were people on social media and on mobile just trying to give false information, and somebody who's in pain. So I think it's more than regulators. We need to somehow motivate people. It's more of a social and a behavioral change which needs to come into the community. And it has to be collective and ongoing work.
So important, such a message. Now, I'm going to ask each of you just maybe a sentence each from a question from Alize. Do the panel have advice from their own experience about how we can open up global mobility opportunities, study or work overseas to students from disadvantaged backgrounds? Colin, you can start with that one.
We've got a number of initiatives here at Queen Mary for students coming to us from overseas, from disadvantaged backgrounds. We've put a number of programs in place working with governments and organisations overseas. With our UK students, we've got a number of opportunities. Some panel members have talked about short stays. I think that is very, very important. There are a number of students that have never been on an airplane, and also students, because of family reasons, will not leave the family home or around London. But what I would leave you with is that we are an international university, which is very important. 5 campuses on London, and we have 162 nationalities. And there you meet so many people from different backgrounds, different traditions, different cultures. And it's where you bring people together to learn from each other that is so important, as well as all we can do to get people to have experience of traveling and meeting people overseas.
Fantastic, thank you. Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I think making sure that you don't assume that the benefits are obvious. It's often believed when it comes to disadvantaged young people that the thing that we need to do is create opportunities, and their young people will automatically understand why they're important, be able and willing to take advantage of them, and all good things will follow. Actually, that's not true. Creating opportunity is only the part of it. You've got to make it an opportunity that young people can practically take advantage of, and you've got to make sure it's clear why it will be a beneficial opportunity, why it isn't a scary or an expensive or a difficult thing to do. And one of the most critical things in all of our programme delivery that we do is young people talking to young people. Our best ambassadors for any opportunity are the year 13s talking to the year 12s, the undergrads talking to the year 13s. So it's often institutions kind of getting out of the way and making sure that young people talk to young people about what it's really like is the best way to encourage and support.
So important, and goes back to some of what Priti said, which I call co-production as well, which is so important. You know, we sort of pretend we do co-production, but we actually don't. Maddalaine, what do you?
Yes, I mean, the key barriers, you know, are obviously their finance, so properly providing access to funding, and sometimes with more disadvantaged students, just providing 75% of the funding is not enough because they've got nowhere to go for the other 25%. So really understanding the financial situation that some people are in. Colin mentioned the short stays. I think this is important. You know, a lot of disadvantaged students work. They can't give up their jobs for, you know, 3 months to a year, and a lot of them have caring responsibilities. Stuff about enabling them to imagine themselves in the sort of the overseas opportunity, which I think picks up a little bit on what Sarah was saying. And I do think that the peer voices are really strong in this. People like me who've done it and have come back and can tell me that it can work. And the other thing is, it is sometimes going in cohorts, because going to university and being in a cohort can be such a big thing already for disadvantaged students that they don't want to leave them and go off again on their own somewhere else. So I do think those universities that organise quite structured opportunities for students to go in groups can be a really brilliant first step. Yeah, I think those are the things I would say.
Practical examples there, that's great. Isabel, would you?
Probably similar things to what others have said, actually. So very much about the sharing of opportunities, but also a lot of researchers can be quite globally mobile and can be fairly mobile following different funding opportunities. So there might not always be the same kind of cost implications. So things like the MSCA that I mentioned, promoting that is really key. But I also think you need to think a step before that and actually attract people into a research career. And there's definitely a lot that we want to do through our people and culture strategy that I mentioned to really ramp up the public engagement and get people to see research as a career for them and not just something that is open to other people but not them, and really break down the barriers sort of at the point of entry as well, to then open doors further down the line.
Fantastic. Priti, a final word from you as our special guest from India.
Thank you. I'll give a real-time example. Under Reliance Foundation, 3 years back, we started virtual classrooms in villages and then small towns. And it really helped, where we set up virtual classrooms, which we were managing from our head office. And it really became a hit. Unfortunately, pandemic has put on hold, but that is something we need to take. And online education on our geophones, we have picked up from the government, the CBSE, you know, the common syllabus, and we have put it on the phone, and it is absolutely free, and we need to keep adding it. But most important is that you're aware we are building up a university, and under Geo Institute, one of the thoughts which we are brainstorming, and after listening to all, I think we should put more meat to it, is that financially and also, you know, traveling and with the pandemic and the restrictions which will come in each country, is if we can divide the course into some percentage, I don't have the answer, where we can do a lot of online course, and then for some part it can be a physical campus kind of. So we'll have to be, again, innovative and think, but technology, distance learning, online, virtual classes, I think that's going to be the key in future.
If all I can say, if the four of you were running the country or countries and Colin and I were your bag carriers, we might actually do quite well in the world. Can't thank you all enough for your contribution today. We could have gone on for hours on end. I hope and pray you all keep safe and well, and I hope and pray we can meet in person in the very near future. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Be safe.
Thank you so much.
Bye.